Good morning, everyone. Today we will discuss about the bureaucratic structure and chain of command in the Philippine local government. In this topic, we shall tackle the origin of the bureaucratic structure of the Philippine local government, comparison with federal government, and the chain of command in the local government. Here I have a simple diagram, or the basic diagram of bureaucratic structure and chain of command in Philippine local government. The Philippines as Philippine president as the head of the government of the Philippines. He supervises different regions and provinces. However, since he cannot directly supervise each and every one of these regions and provinces, he has delegated some of his supervisory and executive powers to elected officials. For example, in the provinces, there's the governor. The President of the Philippines has delegated some of his powers to the governor so that the governor can supervise and delegate some of his powers towards the mayors who are under his or her jurisdictions. In turn, these mayors shall supervise and delegate some of their powers to the barangay captains of the barangays found within their jurisdiction. There's also cities independent from a province. Some of the cities are located in Metro Manila. There is no province in Metro Manila or NCR because it's a region composed of cities and municipalities. So the same with the mayors in provinces. The mayors of the municipalities and component cities delegate their powers, some of their powers to the barangay and supervise them. Then we have the autonomous regions. Autonomous regions like Dakar and ARMM or the Bangsamoro serve as like an administrative region of their own. The President of the Philippines delegates some of his powers to the administrator of the autonomous regions, which in turn delegates some of their powers towards the governors of the provinces and the mayors of the governors delegate their powers to the mayors again, and the mayors to the barangay captains. And the governors of the individual provinces report back directly to the Philippines, so as the administrators of the autonomous regions. The origin of the bureaucratic structure is actually reflected in the feudal era. It is the feudal era that is supposedly the origin of the bureaucracy, as there is a hierarchy or chain of command located in the structure of the feudal list form of governance during the time of the medieval period. Some of the ancient empires like Rome and Persia have also delegated tasks or have a bureaucratic structure and chain of command that is similar to military. However, the current bureaucratic structure that the Philippines has is actually adapted from the bureaucratic structure of the USA, in which the USA also adapted theirs from the United Kingdom or Great Britain. So, the bureaucratic structure that federal governments all over the world are of the same roots, the feudal system from the era of monarchies. And the Philippines, of course, is a colony of Spain. We have experienced the type of bureaucratic structure during the colonial period. However, there is rampant corruption and abuse. So, most Filipinos would not like to use the Spanish government as or the Spanish colonial government in the Philippines as an example to emulate. So, going back to the feudal era, noble lords rule and have full autonomies within their territories. However, those territories are decided upon by the king and given to each and every one of these noble lords to govern. The king serves as the head of the nation, just like the president of the current times, and all the lords are uh, compelled to heed his call for matters concerning the whole nation, pretty much the same as how the federal governments like the USA is structured. For example, if there is an invasion of another kingdom or the king wants to invade another kingdom, he must call the feudal lords and discern their interests and whether they would like to participate or not. However, because during the feudal era there are court ranks, these court ranks play a crucial part in how feudal lords interact with each other. While in theory, the feudal lords should be equal in power because they have full authority over their uh, territories, court ranks have distorted that. Those of the higher rankings often manipulate or abuse those of lower rankings. In essence, feudal lords are not of the same status at all because their court ranks dictate their social status. During those times, the king is allowed to replace a feudal lord anytime. However, those are all almost always nobles or feudal lords of low ranks because dukes and marquises, which are next in line to the royal family within the hierarchical structure of the feudal era, are often untouchable because they have money or wealth and massive influence. Also, a king cannot carelessly dismiss or replace a feudal lord because feudal territories are the source of income for the government or for the royal family or for the royal treasury. The tax that comes from these feudal territories goes to the royal treasury. And if the king is careless, the feudal lords could band together and reject paying the taxes, which would in turn force the king to offer terms that would be advantageous to the feudal lords. In fact, there were even times when the king is just a puppet of the feudal lords. And with this with these things that happened in history, there would be changes. While the fact remains that the federal type of government is adapted from the feudal era, there are certain factors, for example, the rampant corruption and tyranny during the feudal era, that is not possible with the current federal structure. The bureaucratic structure of Philippine local government, we all know that local government units follow a simple hierarchy. The ones at the top have all the say, have all the rights, have all the power over the ones below them. And even if local governments have their own executive, legislative, and judicial bodies, the national government still have jurisdiction over everyone else because we are a unitary form of government. In a province, which is the biggest local government unit, the executive there would be the governor. And what the governor says, those below him, the mayors and the barangay captains, are forced to follow. Same with the laws set forth by the Sangguniang Panlalawigan. Those laws should be followed by everyone else. None of the Sangguniang Panglungsod or Pambayan or Sangguniang Barangay can overturn the ordinances that are put in place by the Sangguniang Panlalawigan. Then the judiciary. The judiciary has its bureaucratic structure. However, it's decided by the levels of the court, and outside of the special courts like Sandigan Bayan, Court of Tax Appeals, and Sharia Court. Sharia Court is exclusive for followers of Islam or the Muslims. There are two levels of courts in the hierarchy for local governments as established through legislation. These are the regional trial courts, second level courts, which are provincial level courts, and the first level courts, which are for the cities and municipalities, the metropolitan trial courts, municipal trial courts, and municipal circuit trial courts. Cases held in lower level courts may be appealed to a higher court. So, for example, a course in the municipal trial court has reached conclusion. However, the individual or the defendant or the accused is dissatisfied with the decision of the municipal trial court, they are allowed to appeal to the regional trial court. The regional trial court will review the case, hold a hearing, then eventually make a decision. However, if the defendant or the prosecution is not satisfied with the result or the conclusion, they may still appeal to the Court of Appeals. And if it does not conclude there, then it would eventually end up to the Supreme Court. And once the Supreme Court has decided, it is final and binding. No court can overturn it because the Supreme Court is the highest judiciary body in the Philippines, and their decision is final. Also, while courts can review cases from the lower courts, they must still follow the rules of procedure set forth by the Supreme Court. Here is a diagram of the judicial system hierarchy. So, as you can see, the Supreme Court is at the top, and directly beneath it is the Sandigan Bayan, the Court of Tax Appeals, and the Court of Appeals. Underneath the Court of Appeals, on one side is the Sharia District Courts, the provincial level courts for Muslims, then the municipal or city level courts, which are the Sharia circuit courts for the Muslims. Then the common ones are the regional trial courts, which is for the provincial level. Then for the city and municipal level, the metropolitan trial courts, municipal trial courts, and municipal circuit trial courts. Regardless of their different names, all these four basically are the same. They perform the same functions, and also some courts appear to handle specific type of cases only. In comparison with the federal government, a unitary government is actually the direct opposite of a federal government. Whereas in the federal government, the states, individual states outside of the central government have greater power. In the unitary, it is the central government who has the greater power. And both Philippines and USA are republics. However, as I have mentioned before, the USA is a federal republic. It is in their constitution that the federal type of government or federal structure of governance is preferred. It's in the provisions of their constitution. While in the Philippines, with being a unitary republic, it's in the power of the national government to decide the direction of which all local governments are to go. For example, in terms of natural disasters or threats to national security, the command is centralized. It's under the command of the national government. So the order that goes from the national government shall go down to the lowest of the local government units, from the top to the roots, not the other way around. Unlike in federal government, unless it's a matter of national security or national emergency, the federal government has almost no power to order. In all actuality, the federal government has no power to interfere with the individual states. And here I have some contrasting qualities between the federal and the unitary government. In the federal, individual states have full autonomy in governance. Each state is actually equal in terms of power. So the state of Michigan and the state of Ohio, regardless of who's the bigger state, who has the bigger income, who is richer, they're equal in power. That's also reflected in the way they held the elections. So individual states have full autonomy under the federal government, while in a unitary form of government, the regions and provinces are under the control and supervision of the central governments through elected local government officials, in which their powers are delegated through decentralization. Then we have another one. State income belongs to that state alone. The state has all rights to decide its own budget. The federal government, a state, only has to pay tax for the national or the central government. The rest of its tax revenue are used for the annual budget of that particular state. Meanwhile, in unitary, the income or the taxes or the revenue from different provinces and regions are collected, and the allocations are decided by the central government after several hearings. And in these times, the unitary government may seem a little bit unfair, as individual regions with higher income often than not deserve to have a higher budget. However, since it's unitary, the income, for example, the highest, the region with the highest income is probably NCR, or NCR is the one with the highest income. NCR is compelled to share its wealth with other regions. Do you get the point? Okay, so with regards to that, there's also some delay as there would be revisions on the budget allocations. Whereas here in the federal government, because they are already, it's within the state, the legislative body of the state itself is the one that decides the budget of the state, there would be almost too little delay, almost none too little delay. So let's proceed to the third contrasting quality. Federal governments can freely interfere with the government of individual states. As I've already mentioned, they have full autonomy, so they can't interfere. The only way that the federal government or the central government can interfere with federal states is when there is a matter of national security. Whereas in the unitary, central government has full authority over local government, and orders from the central government takes precedence over everything else. Regardless of the local chief executive decision, he must still follow what the central or the national government has mandated. The chain of command in the local government, it's very simple in actuality. As I've already said, it's a hierarchy. The ones at the top are to be followed by the ones at the bottom. It's basically the same as in the military, because your ranking is decided. However, in the local government, it's actually the pay grade. So if your pay grade is not within a certain threshold, you almost have no to little authority. And thank you for listening. These are some of my references for the diagram. The first diagram, the one that's showing the bureaucratic structure of the local governments, is under the link of dumagueteinfo.com. And the second diagram that's displaying the judicial hierarchical structure of or the bureaucratic structure of the judiciary is from elcomblos.com. Thank you and good morning to everyone.